أشرف الأعراب والعجم محمد.
In the midst of vast brutality, discrimination, and back-breaking work from sunrise to way after sunset, how did enslaved men and women find love and marriage? You'll be surprised at what we find out. In today's episode, we will be once again knocking down assumptions and stereotypes with a very rare story. Anna, as discussed in the last episode, was a mulatto slave. Based upon research from census and other family lineage pyramids, I discovered that her mother was Rachel Carroll, not to be confused with Rachel Hart, who we'll get to in the following episodes. As a possible father for her was Charles of Carrollton. Now you may believe that this was through rape and brutality, however the evidence I found points to an exact opposite. Although another beautiful lady, Anna Marie, is actually mentioned as his concubine, it appears Rachel may have been as well. In fact, I found a document that surfaced in the 20th century listing Rachel as a spouse. Now we know there couldn't have been any legal or recognized relationship between them. However, the speculation of a secret relationship has been made by many Black Carroll descendants and biographers. Now, while this may appear shocking, let's discuss some history. In Maryland in the 1600s and early 1700s, it was not uncommon for free African descendants to have white partners. The earliest slaves in Maryland around 1619 and 1620 were found to have developed relationships with their white counterparts. Initially, this practice was not banned so long as the African descendant was a free man or woman. However, later, as a new generation of African slaves started to acclimate themselves to the culture of America and the system of slavery evolved, the practice started to be frowned upon. However, this did not stop it. In 1690s to the early 1700s, before the time Alex Haley's Kunta would have arrived in Annapolis, a ruling was publicated that any African and white relationship would come with the consequence that the white woman would be disowned and her status in society would change to be a slave, and a white man caught in a romantic relationship with a black woman would have to endure 7 years of labor. However, when this still did not stop the practice, they completely banned it and enforced harsh punishments against African descendants if caught with a white partner. Now, let's go back to Rachel Carroll, born around the late 1700s or early 1800s. So Rachel, as did all of her mothers before her, and very common amongst slave women, had 13 children, all who were mixed-race children, slaves who worked in the house or had jobs of menial labor, depending upon their skills. Upon her death, Rachel received an entire funeral attended by several relatives of the Carroll family and a specialized plaque imported from the United Kingdom. To make things more interesting, she had received a reformed or renovated house, unlike most other slave houses, which definitely indicated some kind of a special connection, definitely to the Carroll family. And to make things even more interesting, she also had written, there was a document of freedom written for her father, Yellow Harry, and included her name, which was never truly executed. For whatever reason, we may never know, but what we do know for sure is that there was something very unique between Charles of Carrollton and Rachel Carroll. Understanding the history behind it and the grand stature of Charles, we understand, and it explains a lot why they may have kept this relationship completely hidden, even from the other slaves on the plantation. As little evidence as possible would have had to be left behind so as to not raise suspicion and complications for their relationship. And while it was clear in earlier bios of our earlier foremothers that rape may have been a brutal outcome, nothing exactly suggests in any of the narratives that this may have been the case for Rachel Carroll, mother of Anna, again, not to be confused with Rachel Hart or the other concubine of Carroll, Anna Marie Carroll, as well. Sometimes when we read or watch movies about slaves, it almost starts to appear that they only married who was right in front of them. Nothing could be further from the truth. Slaves were well aware of the city and neighborhoods around them. There were enslaved people who married with neighboring Spanish speakers, Native Americans, even other free immigrant Africans. They were not relegated only to the slaves on their plantation. Slaves in Baltimore had the most freedom in moving around and encountering other ethnic partners that they married. So while you may think that your DNA is made of a white master who may have brutalized your ancestor, you may be surprised to discover your ancestors may have encountered other populations. Also, due to the nature of slavery and the uncertainty of whether or not a slave would be sold away from their families, as well as the sexual freedom upon the plantation, there was not always a ceremony to commemorate the start of a marriage, although the slaves would consider themselves married. But a consummation of the relationship would be celebrated as a union itself. But of course, this was only in some cases. In other cases, slaves had the well-known public wedding ceremony, which included jumping the broom. Now, while historians doubt whether the origins of jumping the broom truly trace back to Africa, we know it is a tradition started among slaves to symbolize freedom and togetherness. Love in marriage was complicated during the era of slavery. Because of the lack of freedom itself, literally the soul of a slave was for sale. They had neither control over their thoughts or hearts. They had to overcome the system to find ways to each other's hearts and lives. And they were resilient. What many of us could never do, they found ways to make possible with the untold secrets of the impossible.
محمد أشرف الأعراب والعجم محمد أشرف الأعراب